So, welcome to United States History 1. And in order to begin this course, what I want you to do is to go back in time to the Lower East End of London during the 1500s and the 1600s. And in the Lower East End of London is the slum area. And slums in London were places of course, great poverty, but there was also a great deal of life that went on there. In addition to the people that lived there were plenty of clubs. There were drinking societies, places for where the middle and upper classes could actually get away from their stultified life and go live with the hoi polloi. And they would get into bar rooms and they would sing bawdy songs about drinking and just kind of get carried away with things. And what I want to do in the next moment, in the next slide, is to share with you one of those songs. And what I want you to do is to take just a few moments to read over these lyrics. Now, these lyrics, these words, basically is about drinking, and it's about getting drunk and having a very good time of it. And the lyrics were then put to a tune, and the tune basically goes like this, and I will sing it for you. To Anacreon in heaven, where he sat in full glee, a few sons of harmony sent a petition that he there inspire and patron would be. When this answer arrived from the jolly old Grecian, voice, fiddle, and flute, no longer be mute. I'll lend you my name and inspire you to boot. And besides, I'll instruct you like me to entwine the myrtle of Venus with Bacchus's vine. And let that sink in for a moment and realize that the greatest hymn of the American civil religion, our national anthem, on which the words of the Star-Spangled Banner were based, comes from a drinking song in a Lower East End London section. It was called the Anacreonic Society. These were just middle and upper class guys that wanted to get together and drink themselves silly and have a great time and then sing about it. And this serves as the basis of the American national anthem. And this is one of the reasons why U.S. history is so gosh darn fascinating, is that you always have a story behind the story. And sometimes the greatest of tunes, the greatest of stories, even the greatest of people come from the most interesting origins. So this is how we're going to have the slides of the lessons, of the notes and so forth, is that I'm going to give you this essentially a template, a first slide that's going to have the Roman numeral of the lesson there, and then after that will come the A, B, C, D, E, maybe F and more if necessary. And for each of those letters, there'll be a slide that explains the title in more detail. So what it's going to do is it's going to take you on the journey through U.S. history, and we begin actually as the culmination of numerous forces, political, philosophical, theological, and cultural, that came together in the 18th century. So we need to kind of lay down how people even got to North America in the first place and who the first people were that came to North America in the first place. And then we'll see the outside forces of Europe, of Africa, of Asia, the Islamic world, the Christian world, and the African world as well. Now, somewhere around 30 to 40,000 years ago, the oceans were definitely had receded because of the ice pack of the Ice Age. And this meant that the Russia and Alaska land bridge existed. This is called Beringia because of the Bering Sea. And so about 30 to 40,000 years ago, Paleo-Indians came crossing over the Beringian crossing to follow, of course, the woolly mammoths and the large game that they were hunting. as they were hunters and gatherers. And then about 10,000 to 11,000 years ago, right at the point at which the Ice Age begins to warm, the Nadines followed them into North America. Then the Inuits, or who we call Eskimos in some areas, after the glaciers receded, they migrated over using their skin canoes and so forth. Eventually, these people in North America hunted out all the large mammals. And so they converted to small game hunting. Instead of woolly mammoths, they are hunting deer, they're hunting elk, caribou, gopher, prairie dogs, and so forth. And they begin to settle down because there was no more places for them to go. And so they begin introducing agriculture by the growth of maize, which we call corn. Actually, Europeans call wheat corn, but we call maize corn. And these people begin to build a series of mounds and cities, great burial places. The LSU Indian mounds, for instance, on the LSU campus, or remains of that. Poverty Point in northeastern Louisiana. And you begin to see the rise of these Native American cultures, as we call them, the Adena, the Hopewell, and the Mississippian cultures. Well, of course, in the last 35 to 40 years, Islam has been a front and center issue for the people of this country. Well, the history of Islam is something that is very integral to the building of this nation. Islam, of course, broke out of the Arabian Peninsula around 600 AD and went all the way to Spain, went all the way into Europe at one point, and all the way to the Indus River. A series of caliphates, which are essentially Islamic kingdoms, grew up in the Arabian Peninsula, in Mesopotamia, in Persia, in North Africa, and in Spain. And then, of course, the Crusades came in the high Middle Ages. And the Crusades begin to open up land routes to the east. And as a result of this, in going through the markets of the Middle East and so forth, they discovered the spices and the silks and so forth that come out of the Far East that had made their way along the trading routes. Because of Islam, also, you have the introduction of mathematics. Remember that Muslim scholars during the early Middle Ages, this was a golden age for them. They developed algebra. They developed astronomical instruments, navigation techniques, navigational instruments like the sextant and the compass. These are the things that are going to help Europeans eventually reach the Western Hemisphere. Without the contributions of Islam, you do not have the marineros, that is the sailors, the conquistadors after them, that go to the Americas, because they never would have been able to get away from the coasts of their own countries without those navigational instruments and so forth. Meanwhile, Europe in the 10th centuries and the 11th centuries was shattered. You had the Norse invasions, that is, the Vikings had gone all over, raiding and settling. You later on had an uptick in the Ice Age that already existed. We call it the Little Ice Age. These various little nation states of Europe were very poor, very fragmented. It was a feudal system, but eventually, after the Ice Age begins to recede, you begin to see the larger states of Europe, France, Britain, Spain, England, Germany to a certain degree. Spain begins to get its act together, and it undertakes the Reconquista of both Spain and Portugal. That is, they drive the Muslim rulers out of Spain and Portugal. This is called the Reconquista, and this allows Spain to consolidate as a kingdom in 1491. Without the consolidation of Spain, there's no sponsor for Columbus when his time comes. While all this is going on at the same time in the Western Hemisphere, the Amerindians are also beginning to consolidate. Now, I use the term Amerindian Native American, Indian. I consider them all interchangeable. You may use whatever you wish to use. I have no problem with that. First tribes, like in Canada and so forth. The big nations, the big confederations, the Iroquois Confederation in New York State, and their creation messianic epic, the Haudenosaunee, which it talks of a Messiah, so a God who comes to earth in the form of a man, who then undertakes a series of adventures and so forth before dying off. And of course, in the heart of Mexico was the Aztec Empire of Montezuma, which will later be conquered by Cortez. But the Aztec Empire consolidated the heart of Mexico. This was a tremendous civilization. And then you also had in the southwest of what we call the United States today, the Anasazi, and they lived in pueblos. These are semi-nomadic people. That is, they moved from one place to another, but it was only two places. And usually it was wintertime and summertime they would go. And they built their mud brick dwellings called pueblos in the sides of cliffs because it offered them protection and shelter and a great deal of stability as well. This is actually a photograph that I took when I was 13 years old back in 1981. This was at Mesa Verde National Park, which is in the northern part of Arizona near the Four Corners. And you can see the tremendous intricacy of this Pueblo community that of course had vanished into time. But I had actually gone up onto the cliff and took with my little drugstore camera back in the day. I don't know if you all remember things like that. And then had the film developed, and I've kept it, and then I digitized it. And that's actually my group that you can see there circled down on the bottom. We had climbed up to the top to take the photograph, and it really is. It's a majestic thing to look at, but it also shows how well developed these people were. Now, what you see before you is a map of New York State, but it shows the divisions of the Six Nations of the Iroquois. You have the Seneca, Oneida, Cayuga, Onondaga, Tuscarora, the Mohawks, of course, and then eventually they would add the Mohicans to them, and it would become the Seven Nations. This was a confederation. That each of these groups, they were more linguistic groups than they were political groups, but they all had a centralized government, a big chief who was essentially the commander in chief of the armed forces, first among equal, but each of the tribal regions then had their own leadership and so forth. And they lived in long houses, they had towns, they were dressed in beautiful different colors and so forth. And they were an incredibly well-settled people by the time the Europeans came sniffing along the coast of the Atlantic. Last but not least is the involvement and the role that the African continent and its peoples play. Remember this, Africa is not a country, it is a continent. It is the second largest continent on the face of the earth. Unfortunately, the way our maps are, it tends to show Africa as much smaller than Asia when it's really not that much smaller than Asia. Africa is peopled by many, many different diverse peoples living on many different diverse grounds and lands. Of course, the most prominent feature of Africa is the Sahara Desert, but just to the south of that is the Sahel and the savanna grasslands, and then, of course, the great jungles of the Congo. And then you go down further south into the Kalahari Desert until you get to the ridge along the South African coast, which is called the Drakensberg. Africa, of course, has Lake Victoria, the Nile River in Egypt, the Congo River in the center of Africa, the Niger River through South and Western Africa. The African nations adapted quite well to their environment because remember, at one time, the Sahara Desert was a great grassland. and then the Earth's tilt changed just slight enough so that it basically burned a scorching scar along the Sahara and the Arabian Desert and along the Iranian Plateau and so forth. All right, so back to the African nations. They begin to use crops like millet and rice. They developed a very strong social hierarchy, and they had technological advancements like iron smelting. In addition to that, you also had Islamic traders, Islamic merchants who used the camel. The camel, of course, is the ship of the desert. This allows Arab traders to cross the Sahara because a camel can carry so much water and fat within it. It can be a long, long trip, no troubles. But with these Islamic caravans came the slave trade, and the slave trade begins to flourish very strongly in South and Western Africa, in the Senegambian region, which is right in the bite of Africa, and then along the south and western coast toward Angola. Now, this will end the first day's lessons for you. It's not a whole lot in the way of notes. And then, of course, as the days go on, we'll get into longer lessons and so forth. But it's just something to kind of acclimate you to how the class is going to be. Now, what I expect you to do is to go into your textbook and access the chapter and section in your Canvas, okay, on how to, how to study on Native American histories before the conquest. That's chapter 1, section 1. So make sure you do that. And if you have questions, please get in touch with me again. Looking forward to more lessons, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you all. Please do not hesitate to ask questions as we go along. Last note before I call this session to an end, and that is there will be a quiz every Friday. So coming up on Friday, I'm going to quiz you on all of what we studied during the week. Okay, take care and have a great week.